I've really been enjoying salvaging with the Vulture and Star Citizen lately, but it got me wondering, how much money can you actually make if you completely fill one up? More specifically, I wanted to compare a full load of recycled material composite, or RMC, against a full load of construction materials, which you get by refining construction rubble. So I decided to test it properly. I filled the Vulture with RMC, sold the entire load, then did the same thing with construction materials to see which one actually made more money. So why the Vulture? For me, it's one of the most accessible ways to properly get into salvaging. You can buy one at Lorville for around 2.5 million AUEC, and while you can pledge for it, I'd honestly recommend earning it in-game. It also sits in a really good middle ground, so you don't have to jump all the way to the Moth or the Reclaimer, but you still get a much better salvaging experience than smaller options. The Salvation is too limited on cargo space, and the Fortune only has one salvaging head. So for most players, I think the Drake Vulture is a really solid balance of price, cargo capacity, and salvage speed. So let's start with filling up the Vulture with construction rubble. For this, I accepted a 10,000 AUEC salvage contract because anything more expensive than that was generally too large for the Vulture to be able to fracture. While the cheaper contracts usually just aren't worth the time because they're not going to give you enough SCU of construction rubble. So basically, I would fly out, fracture the ship, collect the construction rubble into the ship's depot, and once the depot was full, eject the SCU boxes, and then repeat the process. Now I am aware that you don't necessarily have to keep accepting new contracts. You could scan the surrounding area for other ships to fracture instead. The problem is that it can be a little hit or miss because the Vulture can't fracture every ship you come across. So for the purpose of this test, I wanted to keep this a little more consistent rather than potentially spending a lot of extra time searching for suitable wrecks. One thing I noticed pretty quickly is that not every ship gives you the same amount of construction rubble. Some contracts definitely seem to give you a better yield than others, so there is a bit of variation there, and I think the more you salvage, the better you understand which ships will give you more. I also ran into 3 server errors during this process, and if that server error occurred while I was collecting rubble from a fractured ship, unfortunately I wasn't able to pick up the remaining material that was left behind after the server recovered, which meant I had to move on to another contract. Because of that, I ended up doing 6 contracts in total, or 60,000 AUEC in fees, but realistically, without those server errors, I think 5 decent contracts would probably have been enough to completely fill the Vulture. So when I calculate the final profit, I'm going to subtract 50,000 AUEC rather than the 60, because I think that's a more realistic cost for the run. Next up was RMC, and this was definitely the easier of the two methods, at least in terms of filling up the Vulture. With RMC, one good salvage contract can be enough to fill the entire Vulture. I'd recommend taking one of the 20,000 AUEC contracts, since those usually give you a large enough ship to scrape a full load from. Personally, I like the C2 contract if you can find one. It has a lot of large flat surfaces which make it really easy to scrape efficiently. That's the contract I used for this test, and from the moment I started scraping to the point where the Vulture was completely full, it took me about 45 minutes. Maybe more experienced salvagers can do it a little bit faster than that. But that was it. So after that, all that was left to do was fly back and sell the load and see how much we made. So let's start with the construction rubble. I collected 35 SCU worth, but after refining, I was only left with around 11 SCU of construction materials. I used the pyrometric refining method. The yield was essentially the same as some of the slower options, but it did cost me about 1,400 more, but also saved me 3 hours of refining time, which I thought was okay. I then sold that 11 SCU of construction materials at Microtech L2. SC Trade Tools were showing roughly 13,000 AUEC per SCU at most locations, and my total did come out to exactly 143,000 AUEC for that. Unfortunately, I did have to sell it in 3 small chunks because of a bug, but the total was about the same. But do remember, we spent 50,000 AUEC on salvaging contracts to collect that rubble, so once you subtract that, you're only left with 93,000 AUEC. For RMC, SC Trade Tools did show Terramill's Hydrofarm as the highest paying option, but I avoided it because planet-side elevators have recently been very unreliable for me. So instead I went to Orison, which was paying around 900 AUEC less, but importantly it was working. I ended up selling 34 SCU of RMC, totaling 243,000 AUEC, but once you subtract the 20,000 that we spent on the contract, that leaves us with 223,000 AUEC in overall profit. So for me, there is a pretty clear winner here. RMC was easier to collect, required only one contract, didn't have to be refined, and ultimately made about 130,000 AUEC more profit than construction materials. So if I'm taking my Vulture route specifically to make money, I'd personally be filling it with RMC and selling it at the best reliable location I can find. And that's going to do it for this video. If you're enjoying the content, and especially if you're finding these videos useful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I know that a lot of you watching are still not subscribed, and subscribing will genuinely help the channel out a lot. But with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.